Welcome to House of Hollingsworth. I'm Kate, and today I'll be sharing how I achieve a vintage French oak look like this on timber furniture. Let's get into it. I was lucky enough to pick up this little chest of drawers for free from a friend. Such a score. Normally I would scour Marketplace or op shops and I'd pay up to $50 for an oak piece like this. You can see that the old finish is failing and that there are some marks on top, but I'm almost always able to get a nice finish with oak, so if you have an old oak piece, this is a great technique. I've used it on other timber types as well, but oak is my favourite for this light look we're going to do. If you have a look here, see how the drawer isn't sitting flush? It should sit flush with the edge like that, but instead it doesn't stop, it pushes too far in, but it only does it on one side. You can't push this side in. So I'll show you what's causing that. This is the drawer's runner. This is the part that the drawer runs along. This is the drawer's guide. This is the part that guides where the drawer should go. Over here, it's got its runner, but it's missing its guide. So the drawer can push too far in that way, which brings this corner in too far. So what we're going to do is we'll just use a scrap piece of wood, glue it on there, in the right spot obviously, and that will stop the drawer from going skew-if inside the cavity. So the drawer guides are in, and now we're going to put drawer stops in. So I like to put, if this piece here is deeper than the underneath of the face of the drawer, then that's where I like to put a drawer stop. Otherwise you can put the drawer stops on the end of the runners. I like to use old wooden blinds as my drawer stops. You can almost always find broken wooden blinds locally for free, and I just cut the cords off and store the slatted timber for future projects like this. I find that if I nail the drawer stops while the glue is wet, there's a good chance the little piece of wood will shift, so I just clamp it until the glue dries and then I add a nail. So I've set my sliding square to the thickness of the bottom of the drawer face, and then that's how I transfer that measurement on to this here. Look, totally random, but we eat a lot of yogurt. I always wash out my yogurt tubs and keep them because they're so handy. They're handy as little paint buckets. They're handy to collect the handles and hardware in. I use them all the time. So we're going to take all the hardware off. Remember to number your drawers as you pull them out. You can see these little bolt covers. You just have to stick a flathead screwdriver underneath and that will pop right off. We go. It's got little teeth. I've bent that one a little bit, but I'll bend it back with a hammer before I put these back on again. Look at these amazing handles. I hope they clean up really nicely. have a close look. This has got some kind of cockroach poop that is not washing off. So this is when you've got to give it a good scrub. I'm just using warm, soapy water. If this caked on cockroach poop won't come off, then I may have to sand all of the drawers. Not a lot of luck so far. I mean, it's better than it was, but still gross. Okay, now we want to strip the old finish off, and the old finish I am pretty sure is a shellac finish. So shellac is dissolved with methylated spirits, so we just dip a little bit of superfine steel wool in. Wet the whole thing all over, and then I'll give it a good scrub. And you should probably be wearing gloves. I always do more than one coat. I let it sink in a little bit. I start scrubbing it, and then you have to wipe it off, because if you let it dry on there, the shellac will just dry, and it'll be a pretty gross finish of it. It'll be really brown and murky. Okay, that's removed the old finish. I'm going to let it dry thoroughly, and then I'll give it a sand. Using the methylated spirits to remove the shellac normally leaves oak a really light colour, but it's like this has been stained or something before the shellac, because it didn't lighten the colour enough. So I've just run the sander over it. This is the kind of colour that oak will come out. This is what we're going for. So even though I've stripped the shellac off it, I'm not happy with the colour. So I'm going to sand everything off. Okay, this is colour difference between the one that's been sanded and the two that haven't. I've only done the first coat of sanding on this. I'm going to go back and do 180 and 240 afterwards, but while I've got my 120 grit on, I'll go ahead and do these two. Okay, after a world of sanding, it probably took me about 3 hours to finish the whole piece. This is the colour that it looks, and I want it to stay this light colour, but once you put a sealant on it, it'll darken it. So to stop the dark colour coming, we're going to do a paint wash, because I want to be able to see. I mean, look at the grain on this, it's so pretty. And I want it to stay that kind of colour. So let's do a paint wash. If you want to see what colour it is when it's sealed, just get a wet rag and wipe it down like that. That's the colour it would be if you just put sealant straight on it. But I want it to be this light colour, so that's why we're doing the paint wash. When you're mixing up a paint wash, you want 1 tablespoon of paint in 1 cup of water. You can make any kind of paint wash you like, just from those sample pots of paint. But for this French oak look, we're using a taupe coloured paint. So choose a paint that's a very light coffee coloured to begin with, and add a tablespoon of paint to a cup of water. And you get that. But you can do any number of different paint washes. You can use black paint if you want it to be a much darker look. You can use a brown paint if you want the wood to look like a browner coloured wood. A white paint if you want to give it a whitewash. Grey paint if you want it to look more like driftwood. Yeah, play around with it. I've tried plenty of different paint wash techniques, and this is what I like the best. Brush on a nice thick layer of wash to cover a full panel, then wipe it off with a rag. Some people prefer to brush on a thinner layer and just leave it to soak in. It's up to you, play around with it, find a technique that you like. I've found that if I don't wipe the excess off, it can leave paint marks like brush strokes, whereas when I wipe it back, I can achieve a more flawless look. And I'm using a wet rag today because that's what I had closest, but normally I would use a dry rag. The paint wash adds a layer of colour before you seal the timber. So we're going for a vintage French oak look here, and that's why we're using this light warm coloured paint, so that when you add the sealant, the timber won't significantly darken. Once you've wiped the wash off, just wait a couple of minutes for the timber to dry so that you can properly assess the colour. And if it needs to, you can add a second layer or a third layer of wash until you get the colour that you like. Once the timber's dry, you can seal it with a water-based poly. If you seal it with an oil-based sealant or a wax, you'll find that the oils will seep under the wash and darken the timber again, so always use a water-based poly for this lightened look. You can use a brush or a roller or a sprayer for the top coat. I'm using a brush here, but if it was a bigger piece of furniture, I'd definitely spray it. It's so much quicker. As a reminder, here's the before and here's the after. It's still got plenty of character, but it's a much lighter colour. You can clearly see the beautiful oak grain pattern again. The poly has such a subtle satin sheen to it. I love this look so much. The original handles cleaned up so nicely, and I added new drawliners in a vintage botanical print to suit the style of the piece. I hope you enjoyed my vintage French oak style furniture makeover today. Thanks for being here, and I'll see you next time.